Welcome back to Writer's Block. I am your host, journal staff writer Sean Reider. As always, can't believe the season is as close as it is at this point. I think right now we are about 2 weeks away, more or less. Pretty insane. Week 0 is coming up. And I have not done one of these a little bit. Fall camp is well underway. They're over the halfway point. We are kind of in the dog days of camp for UNM. And I want to take a little bit of time to kind of run through a couple storylines from camp, a couple things that have interested me, a couple things that have been become apparent, at least throughout camp. The last time I did one of these, I think I went, last time I did one of these solo, I think I went 45 minutes straight without breathing, basically. Not doing that today. It'll be a little bit shorter. But I did want to lead off with something that it kind of is the major storyline in camp. It kind of was the main storyline that we were thinking about all throughout summer, that I was writing about throughout summer. And there's a good chance by the time you're listening to this, time you're watching this, however you consume our podcast, that this decision has been done and made. But I feel like you kind of have to address it regardless. That is the quarterback competition between Jack Layne and James Laubstein. Head coach Jason Eck always said that it was going to be a quarterback competition. He didn't always know if it was going to be a 2-horse race. It has been a 2-horse race for pretty much all of fall camp. Not pretty much. It has been for all of fall camp. And the clock is kind of winding down on it. Eck has said that he wanted to make a decision and go with a starter, name a guy. Pretty much by the time school starts on August 18th. As I am recording this, it is the Friday before that. They have a scrimmage today, and that could change some things potentially in terms of the competition. But I am kind of expecting a starter to be named this weekend. But I did want to run through it, and I'll even add my prediction, so I could end up looking dumb, which is always great content. I think Jack Layne is going to be the guy. I said it at the throughout the summer at certain points on different shows and writing and all that. I kind of felt this way at the start of camp, but I respected what James Laubstein did a lot during spring practice. Obviously, Layne was sidelined with a kind of elbow injury that just kind of came up due to overuse. That has been completely fine throughout camp. Layne has not missed any time. He's looked pretty comfortable throwing the ball. And I think there's been a couple hiccups for him, but really few major bumps. There hasn't been a lot of days, if any, really, where you've watched Layne and said, I don't know. I think he's had one truly ill-advised throw, and that was in the scrimmage, pass rush coming in, and he just threw kind of a rough pick. Was just really need to be smarter with the ball there. I think his decision-making overall has been pretty good. Of course, I don't name the starter, so we will see what the staff says, but I think it has been Layne, and I don't think he has seized the job, as you can probably glean from how I'm kind of talking about it. It's not like it's been, hey, he is so clearly the best quarterback. I think he is the best quarterback in the room right now, but it is not it's not a head and shoulders kind of deal. I don't think there has been a ton of separation. Jason Eck has kind of said similar between a lot of separation between Layne and Laubstein to this point. And again, I think that goes back to Laubstein. He deserves a lot of credit for that. Eck has said it's not like it's one guy has completed 48% of his passes or something like that. It has not been neither party has made it an easy decision to this point. I do think for Laubstein, I think it was the way it was always needed to go was that he kind of really needed to be head and shoulders better than Layne. I thought that. I still kind of think, frankly, that the advantage Layne has had, kind of, being a guy that has worked in the offense, previously repped in it, played in it, been successful in it. With that advantage, it was always going to take Laubstein kind of just really playing out of his mind and playing, really beating Layne on more days than not. I think he has beat Layne on certain days. I just don't think it's been a super consistent thing. I think it's been a lot tighter. I think there's been a lot more days where they've kind of left, or I've personally kind of left practice and said, I don't know if either quarterback really outplayed each other. And I kind of think that plays more into Layne's favor than anything else. But that is the take. We're going to find out soon. I'm kind of happy. This has been a quarterback competition. It has not been a quarterback controversy. I don't think it's been a negative thing for the team, honestly. if anything, I think it's been a very fair competition. I think the way that the reps have been divvied up between Layne and Laubstein and the first team and the second team and all that has actually been pretty fair. And I don't think it's been, I think some programs have put on quarterback competitions in the past that haven't always really felt like actual competitions. I think it's been a real competition. And it's going to come to an end pretty shortly. Eck said that is by design. They, I think Washington State, I think head coach Jimmy Rogers announced this week, the starter won't be named to the public until basically the first snap of their season opener against Idaho. That is not the case here whatsoever, and that's thankfully, we appreciate that as somebody that I appreciate that as somebody that covers the team. They want to name a starter and give them a kind of a ramp up to really work a lot with the first team offense and kind of figure things out there. But yes, that is my take on that. Eck has said he doesn't think that anybody else has really played their way into the competition. From my vantage point, I would agree. UConn transfer Cole Welliver, Gabriel Mochenbacher, and Toa Fave. Those are the other guys in the room right now. Welliver was a guy that you were kind of interested to see and say hey, is this a guy that could play his way into the situation?
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Eck has also said that he doesn't really think that anybody else in the quarterback room has kind of played their way into the competition. From my vantage point, I think that's pretty true. UConn transfer Cole Welliver was kind of the one guy that you were kind of looking at and saying hey, well, we'll see what he has here and see if he can factor in. And I think he's had some good moments. And honestly, during the first scrimmage last Thursday, I think he was 5 for 6 on his one kind of major drive, kind of looked pretty comfortable driving the ball. But I think it's been more of a consistency thing with him. And I think it was always going to be a bit much to ask to a certain point for a guy to kind of come in and not only learn the offense, but also beat out two guys that have pretty good experience, pretty good command of this offense at this point. Obviously, Layne has more experience, but Laubstein got a ton of reps with the offense in the spring, and that really can't get discounted. Gabriel Mochenbacher, Toa Fave, those are guys that UNM has two kind of practice fields that they work with at this point, and one of them is kind of the starters field or whatever, and the other one is kind of the development field. Toa and Gabe have been working on the development field, and nothing wrong with that. I think that's the way they like to do it. It's important at this point that those guys are getting reps, and I think that's a smart move that'll probably pay off in the future. But they're just not factoring in the competition at this point. With that being said, that is kind of my read on that. I did want to get to kind of the other major revelation, the other kind of big storyline out of camp, one that's kind of built kind of steadily and gradually, and then last week they had their scrimmage, and it kind of became immediately clear. The defense is ahead of the offense at this point. Not by an overwhelming margin, but there's been a lot to like from this defense. Of course, that is after UNM's defense has been statistically one of the worst, if not the worst, in select statistics over the last 2 years. Had some moments here and there, but it has just not been a good unit. We have kind of done this song and dance before, in the preseason, where it's we're seeing this out of the defense. Maybe this thing could be interesting. Hey, there's some talent here. I'll offer the bold prediction right now. Completely bold. Blow your mind. This will not be a defense that is statistically one of the worst. It'll be really embarrassing if something happens and very unexpected, and we get to clip this and get it thrown out there as a freezing cold take, but I just don't think that's the case right now. I think this is probably the most talented, this is the most talented defense I've seen in my time on the beat. And they've really played well for the majority of camp and kind of come together pretty quickly, frankly. They have had some things kind of work in their favor. I'll also note that. They had a huge first scrimmage where they held the offense to just one touchdown and then came up with 4 picks, two each from 2 freshmen, C.J. McBean, and then a Volcano Vista graduate linebacker Thomas Pettis. I think part of that, that scrimmage was, it was kind of early in the transition to full pads. I think it was just a second fully padded practice, if I remember correctly. And then UNM has had some injuries on the offense that they've been dealing with, and we'll touch on them a little bit later in the podcast. But I think the town is pretty strong at a lot of key positions in a way that it hasn't been, particularly with the front 7. Really, what they have cooking up front. I think there's guys up there like Xavier Slayton that I thought had good springs, and I think they're having really good camps at this point. I was kind of in a real see it, got to see it to believe it mode with the, the move for Gabe Lopez and Okiki Oloronfunmi coming inside. Previously, those guys worked almost exclusively as kind of, edge rushers and all that. Although Gabe's a guy who's played a ton. When he was in that 3-3-5, every now and then he would have to get down and move inside. But I was kind of questioning, I heard some, talked to Gabe at media days and all that, and he felt that those moves kind of manufactured more depth for them. I kind of needed to see it. I think it's actually worked. And I give them credit for making that move because it's kind of freed them up on a lot of stuff, and it's made a lot of sense so far. I think kind of the defensive tackles, Brian Booker has had a pretty solid camp. Jalen McIver, the Jones College transfer, I think I talked about him the last time I was on this show. I think he's kind of climbing his way up and kind of threatening Booker a little bit. I think both are doing some pretty nice things, though. We'll see what kind of happens with that. But I think kind of the key in a lot of respects to this defense, and I think you can make a pretty good case that he's the most important player on this defense, if not maybe the whole team, honestly, is Idaho transfer Keyshawn James Newby, kind of working at that jack boundary end position. He has been fantastic. He has been really good. He has given this defense something that it has not had in a long time in terms of pass rushing, and also, making plays in the run game. And then having just some really, really rock-solid linebacker play from Jason Eck, Dimitri Johnson, Kaiwan McCray, Jacksonville State transfer. I think he's done some nice stuff. He's kind of doing some interesting things in their posse package as well. Mercury Swaim, transferred from St. Francis, PA, basically only transferred and got on New Mexico's radar more or less because the head coach at Marshall, is friends with Swaim's dad and reached out to Eck and said, hey, this is my friend's son, and he wants to go to New Mexico because he wants to study nuclear physics and all that, and nuclear engineering. And Eck said, okay, well, we'll take a look, and took a look, decided to take him. I think he's done some good stuff. Eck also, Jackson Eck is a guy that we didn't see live during spring. Honestly, I think he's faster than I expected, kind of faster than I saw on tape and all that, and he was good at Idaho. I think there's been a lot to like there in terms of the front 7. That's kind of powering a lot of the I don't want to say optimism because it's not really my job to be optimistic, but it is kind of powering the prediction. Like, I don't think this is going to be a bottom of the barrel defense by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there's stuff going on with the corners in the secondary too. Feels a little more unsettled than what's going on in the front 7. I think the safeties relatively locked in with Tavian Combs and Austin Brawley. Kind of more. I think Brawley is pretty much locked into a starting spot. I think he has been for a while. Honestly, nobody's really just said it. Combs is a guy that has played pretty well throughout camp and done some nice things. And clearly, I think in spring there was still a little bit of hesitancy, like not quite him kind of favoring the leg that that he had injuries on, the last couple years kind of dealing with, but just kind of like a mental block. Does not look like there's any mental block. I think it was only a couple practices ago they rocked running back DJ McKinney over the middle on like 3rd and 1 or something like that. Kind of had set up a huge stop for the defense there. But yeah, I think there's enough here to like that. I'll even offer kind of an even bolder prediction. I think this could be a top half defense in the league, probably lower top half. I think it's going to take a bit more to really kind of get to the point where, hey, it is, a top 4, a top 3, a top 2 defense and all that. And I don't think it's going to be the best defense in the league. But, I think if you're seeing some optimism out of camp in terms of the defense and all that, I think it's been completely warranted. I think they got to keep it up, finish camp strong. And obviously they're going to have a pretty brutal, pretty not ideal test week 1 against Michigan. That is not exactly the place you want to immediately go to try and, keep up with some defensive optimism and all that. But I think this has been the single best group I've seen in terms of generating pressure. And I also think it could be the best run stopping unit I've seen in my time on the beat, which hasn't been super long. And those aren't particularly low bars to cross in terms of my time on the beat. UNM has been absolutely dreadful at kind of doing both for the two and a half years I have been on this beat. But I think this is it, the defense, and I'm excited for people to kind of get eyes on it themselves and kind of start feeling it out for themselves. But want to touch on a couple other things as we kind of wrap up today. I mentioned that UNM has dealt with some injuries on offense. And that has kind of colored some things, with scrimmages and other things. I'm mostly talking about the receiver injuries they had. I think the second practice of fall camp, second or third, something like that. Wide receiver Keegan Johnson, kind of the de facto wide receiver 1, the guy that everybody expected to be the guy in that receiver room, came up at the end of practice with a kind of a pulled hamstring. That was after pulling his other hamstring this summer. He is just now kind of starting to ramp his way back into things. He is practicing. He's not doing 11 on 11. I'm going to get off this podcast, drive over, and go cover the scrimmage immediately after this. I very much doubt that he will be active for the scrimmage. And Eck has kind of said he doesn't think Johnson is a guy that they need, a long time to kind of ramp up and work with. They think they can just ramp him up physically, get him going again, and that he should be good to go for Michigan. Other receiver injuries, Cater Jope and Isaiah Blair. The Jope one, he came up, and that was, I think it was the second week of camp. He came up at the end of practice with kind of I think he twisted his ankle, something like that, really in one of the final, team periods of the day. That's, kind of a blow because I think Jope was a guy that was really kind of factoring in as probably their best, blocker on the perimeter and all that. And then Isaiah Blair, I believe Cerritos Junior College. Don't quote me on that. He has an undisclosed injury, and he has been sidelined for pretty much the last week or so. I still think you need 2 of those guys back, and particularly Johnson, to really feel good about this wide receiver core, kind of heading into any game, whether that's Michigan or Colorado State or whatever. But I have liked what I've seen from freshman Ziel Smith. That's a guy that, UNM, Eck, and offensive coordinator Luke Schleissner kind of said all throughout the summer, like, hey, we think this is a guy that's going to be physically ready. We think he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and really start to contribute pretty early. He has done that. I think it was a little bit of a slow start. Recently, he's really kind of come onto his own, and part of that is also he's getting a lot of work with the first team because guys like Johnson and Jope and all that, are sidelined. I think Sean Miller and Michael Buckley have had pretty good camps too. I think Buckley has probably been the most consistent receiver to this point, which I think is a pretty encouraging thing, honestly. But Miller, I think, is kind of right there, but definitely something to monitor. I think UNM, the fact that they have kind of 2, more move tight ends like, Dorian Thomas and Cade Keith, guys who are very comfortable going out, splitting out, catching the ball and all that. I think that helps in regards to the, the injuries and all that. With, Johnson, Jope, and Blair, it's not like the offense, with those guys being out, it's not like the offense has been, completely helpless and, just unable to complete passes and all that. Just has not been that. I'll also throw in another freshman. I don't know how big of a role he's going to have this season, and maybe injuries kind of play into that, or could play into that for him having a role. Jared Rennick is a walk-on, number 89. He's done some nice things. I think he was the only person to score a touchdown in UNM's first scrimmage, but definitely got to monitor the receiver injuries. and we'll kind of see who's available and who's ready to go for Michigan. I know the staff is expecting at the very least that Johnson will be back though, and that is good news. One other thing, there's been some changes with the starting line. UNM entered fall camp with kind of a competition starting center between Caden Robnett, Idaho transfer, and then Isaiah Solomon, a guy who last year worked pretty much exclusively as UNM's kind of rhino tight end, really just kind of their 6 offensive linemen. It really helped UNM, because that offense loved to max protect, and it worked out well. He is back playing on the offensive line, though. He lost out on the starting center competition with Caden Robnett, so the interior is pretty well settled at this point. Caden Robnett center, Israel McWiza left guard, and then Richard Pierce right guard. Pretty well settled there. But UNM did not come into camp with amazing tackle depth. It's something we talked to Eck a little bit about over the summer. And I was kind of curious how they were going to manage it. I did think that Tevin Shaw was a pretty safe bet to honestly, end up not a pretty safe bet, a very good bet, to kind of end up, as UNM starting left guard. He has dealt with, he's been dealing with kind of a knee tweak, and been out for honestly about a good week at this point. Might be a little longer than that, honestly. And that's kind of opened the door for some more interesting things to kind of happen with UNM's tackle positions. At this point, we heard from Eck, earlier this week. He said that Layne, who was a guy that was kind of factoring in more on the interior. It doesn't really have the prototypical kind of tackle length and all that. That guy is going to be UNM's starting left tackle until further notice. Eck said he thought he won that competition, and now Tevin can kind of factor into the right tackle competition between Novell Brown, who has been the first team right tackle for the majority of fall camp, and then Isaiah Solomon's factoring in. He's getting some good run there, and Shaw. So we'll see what happens there. The interior, again, is pretty well set. I also think they're in a good spot where they could, if one of those guys go down, I don't think there's going to be a huge hiccup, honestly, in replacing that guy. But definitely some interesting stuff going on with the tackles right now. I haven't seen, honestly, enough, in my opinion, of Solomon at right tackle to really have a good feel, for whether he has a leg up or Novell Brown has kind of a leg up. But we'll see what happens there. And I kind of want to wrap up on one point, not really related to UNM football, but you may have seen this already. You probably have if you're listening to this right now. Mountain West availability reports, injury availability reports are a thing now. Was just announced Friday, the day we are recording this. Always felt like it was trending this way. I think the Big 12 finally announced this week. But even like last summer, the MAC was getting in on it. It always felt like this was going to happen. It was hard to see a lot of conferences actively being a holdout from this. Selfishly, I love this. It makes my life easier. I still will have to ask injury questions with these availability reports. They just, they release 3 hours before the game, and it's, hey, these are the guys that are out, but not, here's how long they're going to be out or why they're out. We'll still have to ask questions, but it makes things easier on my end. It makes things easier for other beat writers. So, of course, I am selfishly a fan of that. But I do understand how, if you read the press release today and it's mentioned, gambling integrity and all that, I do understand how that relatively overt connection definitely could be jarring for some fans. So kind of a sign of the times in the world we're living in, but I've had to... I've had to kind of beg for injury info and availability info in my time on the beat, and this makes it a little bit easier in that regard. I just knocked that mic down. They do not have to do them for non-conference games, so that'll be a detail we'll try and get ironed out over the weekend. If they plan on doing them for kind of Michigan and Idaho State and UCLA, I kind of think they won't, but we'll see what happens. That being said, that is... all I have. It was great checking in with you guys. I encourage you guys to like and subscribe. Not just this show, but the rest of the Albuquerque Journal properties. It's some really good stuff going on right now with our podcast in particular. Also, my colleague Jeff Grammer and I, we are back on the weekly schedule for our live shows. And yeah, kind of can't believe football is here this early, but excited to share it with y'all. Thank you.